of you. Yoda, Namaskar. Sri Anand Satyanand, former Governor General of New Zealand, Mr. Satyanand, Mr. Greg O'Connor, Member of Parliament, Mr. Sali, Mr. Chris Wood, Mr. Bhav Dillon, High Commissioner Nita Bhushan, High Commissioner David Pine. Really an immense pleasure for me today to be with all of you at the inauguration, the formal inauguration of this Chancery. In a sense, I would say this morning we are making 3 statements about India in New Zealand. The first statement is of this High Commission, a building that we hope would send its message of a serious relationship, a deep commitment, a modern India, and really a desire to take our relationship to a higher level. The second statement is the High Commission, a colleague with whom I have spent about a quarter of a century in the Foreign Service, who started her career actually with me in Tokyo. And I'm truly pleased that she is representing India here, because I know that she's a very sincere and dedicated diplomat, and she will work very assiduously on this relationship. And the third message is the fact that I am here. The fact that this year we have actually seen 3 ministerial visits by Ministers Paituri and O'Connor from the New Zealand side, and my presence here. And I hope between the 3 of us, we are able to really communicate our shared desire today to grow this relationship and make it much more fit for purpose in the more globalized and sometimes more challenging times in which to live. I'd like to take this opportunity to share my thoughts about this relationship, because this, in a way, is the tail end of my visit, which began in Auckland. I had the privilege of meeting the Prime Minister, of holding discussions in some detail with the Foreign Minister, meeting a number of other colleagues, the Minister Priyanka Krishna, representatives of business, interacting with the larger, I would say, business think tank community, doing a little bit of the press. So as I come to the end of this visit, I'm leaving this afternoon, I would also like to lay before you my thoughts, our thoughts, on where I see this relationship going. For me, it's particularly encouraging that in recent years, our Prime Ministers, Narendra Modi and Jacinda Ardern, have established a relationship, meet from time to time, often on the sidelines of events. The fact that the New Zealand Prime Minister was among the few to join us at Mahatma Gandhi's 150th anniversary celebrations at the United Nations. It does make a difference when the leaders at the highest level are in touch with each other. It also makes a difference when foreign ministers actually get along very well. I should say, in the case of my colleague, Naya Mahuta, very early on in her tenure, when we were still operating with COVID restrictions, we had occasion to talk to each other. We then met up last year in Paris, and then again in Africa and Kigali on the sidelines of the Commonwealth Summit. And I had promised her, saying that I would come, and in a sense, my visit is to keep to my word. Now, it's not just, the toings and froings of ministers or the contacts of prime ministers that would by themselves give you a sense of what is happening. We sincerely believe that the India-New Zealand relationship is due for an update, is due for a refresh. And we do that because this world of ours, no one is really too far. There is no country in the world today where we can say that we are indifferent or we are uninterested or we are uninvolved. And that's, in a sense, a kind of a baseline. I think more positive, optimistic societies can actually see merits and opportunities and possibilities in others. And a lot of what we would like to do with New Zealand is part of that optimistic vision of that world that we have, which I know is balanced by the difficulties which we have seen in recent years, especially at the time of the COVID, which we are still experiencing as a consequence of the conflicts which are going on in other parts of the world, which sometimes encounter challenges like climate events. But in fact, I would argue that precisely because there are so many possibilities and so many challenges, it is important for countries like India and New Zealand to think very with a sort of very open, with a very engaging approach. What do we do together to help ourselves and help the world? Now, the most sensible way today of growing our relationship is really to play to each other's strengths. And, sitting in India, we have some sense of what the strengths of New Zealand are. Obviously, you have a better sense. But my most important message is that we must find ways of doing more business. Because at the end of the day, business is a ballast for any relationship. There can be political ups and downs, there can be bureaucratic switch-ons and switch-offs. But once there is a strong business foundation to a relationship, that relationship is truly strong and steady. So I was very pleased that I had an opportunity, in fact I had multiple opportunities during this visit, to send that message out, that India is open for business, that we would like to see more of New Zealand. There are areas where you have experiences and best practices and capabilities that make a big difference. And if those in some way can be deployed in India, can be deployed through your own initiatives or in partnerships with Indians, through joint ventures, it is something which we would value and you would benefit from. The other area which I think clearly invites us to do more is the digital domain. Perhaps the most remarkable change today taking place in India is in the domain of digital public goods. The fact that we have been able to create a digital backbone, and on that backbone we are able to deliver services to the people on a scale, efficiency and honesty which could not have been imagined just a few years ago. That we can actually give food support to 800 million people, that we can put money in the banks of 400 million people, that we can think in terms of a rapidly growing health system, which is already in hundreds of millions. But we are looking at housing, house ownership programs, which again, the beneficiaries exceed 100 million today. We're looking at farmers support programs, which run into hundreds of millions. So the digital domain actually offers such a huge opportunity. And here, whether it is areas like fintech or skills like cybersecurity, there are huge possibilities, because at the end of the day, these are knowledge-driven businesses which depend very much on creativity, on innovation, on human talent. And we see some beginnings out here, but I would surely like to encourage much more. The third, and of course, probably the most obvious one is the agro business. New Zealand has a global reputation here. Some of your companies have already made some inroads, but again, I would like people in this country to understand that India is moving out of that era of subsistence farming. That today we are a country where not only are we providing largely for our own, but Indian agriculture is actually starting to make its presence felt on the global markets as well. So here too, we see whether it's agriculture, whether it's dairy, whether it's food processing, we see a lot of possibilities, because it is truly an area where New Zealand is a world leader. And we think that in India, which is today so open to learning from the world, we do see great benefits in that partnership. Then of course there's education. There's education. I don't need to tell all of you, so many of you would have come here through the platform of education, through the channel of education. And here too, there is an effort today in India, among the many changes of the Narendra Modi government, is a new national education policy. And one of the goals of the new policy is to make education in India much more open to international collaboration. So when we look at who could be potential partners of this international collaboration, obviously a country like New Zealand stands up, because you already host an Indian student population of some size. There are natural, linguistic and cultural affinities. There is a record out there. You have the experience of international education. So I'm very keen that this possibility go forward as well. Underpinning all of this, ultimately, countries are societies, we are people, and in a globalized, knowledge-driven economy, perhaps one of the changes that awaits us is how do we ensure the mobility of talent, the movement of skills in a more seamless manner. Because the fact is that in the coming decades, where skills and talent resides and where the demands are, they will never be perfectly matched. And the smart economies are those who will provide for that dynamic mobility of skills and talents. And one of the proposals I made during my visit to the New Zealand government was to see whether we could agree on a mobility partnership. We have had some success in this regard with countries in the European Union, with Japan, and there are others like the United States who do it more unilaterally. But we do think again that a mobility partnership is something that is to our mutual benefit. And not least, an area which is of emerging interest, I think for both of us, is the field of traditional medicine and wellness. I think the COVID period has brought home to many of us the merits of perhaps drawing on our own traditions and heritage more extensively. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but the World Health Organization has set up its first global traditional medicine center in India. And as we grow that, I think there are possibilities there for partnerships with which we would like to include New Zealand. I do know that like any relationship, it has its share of problems and challenges, and all that I can say at this point of time is that we will approach that with a great deal of sincerity and positivity. I heard a lot about the need for direct air connectivity. Believe me, one trip to New Zealand makes you understand why you need it. So I go back certainly with a strong sense of motivation to do that. I can only say, of course, that given the airline scenario on both sides, there are perhaps possibilities today which may not have existed before. The other issue, I think, which I spent some time on, was in respect of Indian students here. None of us had an easy time during COVID, but I think students perhaps took a bigger hit than most of us, because they were at a stage where their lifetime possibilities were in some form or the other impacted. So I urged the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister to take a sympathetic and understanding view of the predicament of many students who were here. And I was glad to be assured that they would really approach the issue sympathetically. So I hope to see some progress in that regard. I've largely spoken about our relationship, our bilateral relationship. But you all know there's a larger world out there, a world from which none of us can be insulated. In fact, if anything, we see the world at home every day in so many more different ways. And that world is not short of problems. Immediately, I would say, when we think of the world for India and New Zealand, the Indo-Pacific comes to mind. Because if you look at the larger Indo-Pacific arena, we are, in a sense, at the two opposite ends. A lot of water between us. But the fact is, each one of us has something to contribute to that common region of which we are both a part. And we can contribute to it individually, but one of the sort of basics of diplomacy is when you work with others, you get more done. So diplomacy is a search for like-minded partners with whom you have common interests, and you figure out ways of how to make those interests manifest themselves. Now, I have, of course, shared a lot of our thinking, our approach, our analysis with my counterpart in New Zealand. We believe today that our partnership, it could be economic partnership, it could be technology partnership, it could be, just recently we had our Navy chief visiting New Zealand. Among the important outcomes of that was the agreement on white shipping, which is essentially about keeping the shipping lanes more secure. And that's one example of how countries cooperate to make the world a better place. So all in all, what the picture I present to you today is really of a relationship which I think is ready for its next phase. But when you look particularly at two societies like ours, it is inevitable that you also reflect on history. Before I came for this function this morning, I had the opportunity to go to the museum, the Papa Museum, and I spent some time at a very powerful exhibition there on Gallipoli. I don't know how many of you have seen it. Now, you may or may not have noticed that the number of Indians who gave up their lives in Gallipoli are almost half the number of New Zealanders. And those of you who would have had time or will have time to look at some of the footage that you see there, you actually see pictures of Sikh units. My memory is 16 Ferozpur was there. You actually see Sikh units there, their footage and their presence at the Anzac Beach. So I mention that because in many ways we have a shared history. It's not, frankly, always a good history. Today, both our countries in different ways are coming to terms with our colonial past. We would obviously like to preserve the better part of that heritage. We would also like to honestly address the more difficult part of that history. And I think each one of us has to do it our way. But as we look forward, I think the fact that there is some shared history and some common culture, and you don't even want to get me started off on cricket. The fact that we are members of the Commonwealth, that we, because of our traditions and practices and thinking and in a sense the larger ethos of our society, there are many ways in which we would connect much better than we would with those who may not share those commonalities. So I do believe that we should strive to make the best of that. And I would only say that when we think of New Zealand, there's so much that comes to our mind. And I, even though I'm keeping myself in check, I would say a fine example of our cooperation is actually in cricket itself. Nobody serious about cricket in India will ever forget John Wright. Or anybody who watches IPL and my origins are in Chennai would ignore Stephen Fleming. And probably the most, I would say, the New Zealander best known to most Indians today would be Kane Williamson. And we like him most of the time, except when he plays against us. My personal New Zealand favorite is Ross Taylor, but that's a different matter. We will soon be meeting, I believe, in Australia. Of course, with cricket, you always extend your good wishes to everybody, even though you want your own team to win. Let me conclude really by saying honestly, what great joy I had coming on this trip. For me, it was my first trip here. It was a great learning. It was a genuine understanding of a society with which I would have connected intuitively, but it's always good to come here and do that in person. So once again, really thank you all so much for joining us on a Sunday morning, and I hope that your presence here is one small reflection of the support that you will give to the High Commissioner as she sets about her today. Once again, thank you very much.